Friends, listen. God is still speaking. Amen. Please join me in prayer. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. How many of you out there have seen the show Madam Secretary? It's on CBS. It's, for those who haven't seen it, this is a show that is about the Secretary of State in the fictional government in the United States. And it is one that the producers use to really showcase and bring light at a lot of the problems that affect our country and a lot of the problems that affect our world. This past episode, which aired last Sunday, was one that really struck a chord with me, and is one that, as an immigrant to this country, really affected me in a very impactful way. The show starts out with a mother and a child crossing the border in Arizona, and the mother telling the child that, look, we made it, we are safe now, you are safe from violence, and you can now have a better future, and we're really gonna try to make a life here for ourselves. And the Border Patrol comes in, and the mom says, don't worry, everything's gonna be fine, they're just gonna take us and we're gonna ask for asylum. As they get taken to a facility, the Border Patrols at that facility separate the mom and the child, but the mother tells the child, don't worry about it, they're just gonna give you some food, it's gonna be fine. And they take the child away and then bring the mother to another room to process her papers. As her papers are being processed, she's told that the child has actually been taken to another facility and that she has no rights and that she is now under arrest and they'll take care of the child for her. Once the news of this gets out to the White House, the President and Secretary of State have a conversation with the Arizona governor, where the President is very upset and says that separating children from their families is un-American, it is not even a partisan issue, it is a violation of human rights, and it is simply just wrong. The governor of Arizona responds with, well, this is my right, and I choose to do what I want, and hangs up on the President. With this action, Secretary McCord decides to take the risk to go to Arizona and see the conditions in which these kids are in, knowing that this will be something that will probably put her presidential bid in danger. So she visits the children in Arizona with the ambassador of Mexico so they can see their people. And she sees that the conditions in these centers are horrific. These children are put in cages. They look like animals in cages. And she sees that a child has actually soiled himself. And when she asks the guard who is going to help this kid, who's going to change him, the guard responds with, the person that changes the child and helps the child comes around every 3 hours. And she says, well, no, that's just not okay. Let me in there and I'll change him myself. At this point, the governor comes in to Elizabeth and confronts Elizabeth McCord, the secretary, and tells her that she is out of line, and if she doesn't leave right away, she will be arrested. As she walks away, she goes outside and she sees that there are some news reporters out there. And she looks at them and she takes the risk to tell them exactly what's been going on. And I'm going to read to you a little bit of what she said. What I saw was an affront to decency and an assault on our country's core values. Children separated from their parents in cages, crying, terrified, lacking basic care. No deterrent is worth trading our humanity. No policy, no matter its goal, is worth lowering our moral standing in the world. Nothing can justify harming children. Now, the governor wants me to shut up, but I won't, because what he's doing is immoral and un-American, and every American needs to know about it. After saying this, she was arrested, and the governor told his deputy sheriff to arrest the Secretary of State. And this went all over the United States, and everybody saw this. But this type this show really points a light to the things that are affecting us right now in our country. What happened in Madame Secretary is something that happened in this country last summer and continues to affect people in these detention centers, where this month alone, 2 children have died. We have no idea of the psychological impact that this has done to those poor, innocent children being separated from their families. And now we have a government that is still shut down over the fight of building a wall. We have lies, mistruth, and deceit happening at the highest levels of government and even in our communities itself. What is happening in the world today is beyond red and blue. It's beyond liberal or conservative. What is happening in our nation affects every single one of us. For we have a collective responsibility to respond to it or to accept the consequences of our inactions. In today's Bible verse, we read about being God's chosen ones. And what does it mean to be God's chosen ones? Well, to be God's chosen ones means that we are the living hands and feet of Christ. We are the living hope of God for not just this nation, but for the world. And the text is challenging us to do certain things. It challenges us to be compassionate and patient with one another, to take on the world with a gentle hand, with kindness and with understanding, to be patient with one another. And if someone does something that hurts us, we are called to react in love and to forgive them as God forgives us. We are called to take on Christ as an action, not simply an understanding. It is easy to understand the words that we read. It is easy to say, yes, that is the way that it should be. It is easy to believe in a world that is perfect and that Christ, it rules in the hearts of many. But what is hard is to actually do the things that we simply understand with the mind. For it is in our hearts, in the very nature of our soul, that we are called to change the fallen nature of the human condition. As a collective, we are able to understand the words of Christ, but it is simply not enough to just understand those words. We must bring those words into action. We must become like Christ, and we must take on the risk. And yes, I am using that word on purpose. The risk to stand up against the grain and to begin the path towards righteousness. This is a risk, and it is one that is not taken lightly, for many who have come before us and have disrupted the system have faced ridicule and have suffered the consequences. But if we're not willing to risk our comfort, to risk our sense of privilege, then all of this whole building, our time here today, this morning, is all in vain. For we are called not to bring peace into this world, but to light the world on fire, a holy fire that will rage in the hearts and in the minds of all the people that we touch. For they will also become awakened to the reality that the current nature of this world is one that is broken and in need of healing. Our nation is divided and in need of people who are willing to stand in the breach and put one arm towards the right, one arm towards the left, and become a bridge of love and mercy towards one another. Our communities are in need of an infusion of love, one that will set a tone that empowers people to come forward and speak against the injustices that they see, that they feel. Our churches need a revival, one that has never been seen before, a revival that reaffirms a commitment to Christ and to one another, a revival that awakens the true self of the human heart, the very nature of God in us, a revival that will set us free so that we may operate without fear and without shame. We recently celebrated Christmas, which is a time that we celebrate the birth of hope, peace, love, and joy. And a time that we celebrate the broken veil between heaven and earth. For the universe itself, the nature of the one embodied humanity in a baby boy named Jesus, whose birth story does not have him born in majesty or born in the riches of the world, but born poor and homeless, surrounded by the meek of the earth. Christ the King, the very nature of a fully awakened humanity, is born in a barn. Think of the irony of this. The Prince of Peace, the King of Kings, comes into the world surrounded by those who the systems of oppression have deemed less than. This is a story that starts our journey of self-introspection. For in the story of Christ's birth, God has chosen to turn the world upside down, to break the very nature of the systems of oppressions of the world in order to reset the concept of what it means to be a king, what it means to have power, and how we are to yield that power. Not through strength, but through love. After the birth of Christ, the Bible tells us that Herod orders the slaughter of newly born children in Bethlehem. Mary and Joseph, in order to protect Jesus from danger, leave their homeland and head to a foreign land. They go to Egypt so that Jesus could be saved, so that their child could survive and hope for a better life. It is interesting how this story seems to echo the current reality of many of the families who have come to our borders lately. It is this reality that should change the hearts and minds of anyone who views the desperate acts of these parents who leave all that they know, not for them, but for the hope of a better life and a better future for their children. Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, the one who would change the world, the one who we are to embody, was once an undocumented immigrant. So when we see the news that children are being separated from their families, and reports that in this month alone, 2 children have died in detentions, we must ask the question, what if that would have been the Christ child who died in an Egyptian prison? Because in reality, the very nature of God that exists in all of us also exists in the innocent hearts and souls of those little children. So when we look at the fate of Jacqueline Cal, who was 7 years old from Guatemala, who died on December 8th, and Felipe Gomez Alonso, who was 8 years old and died just before midnight on Christmas Eve, we have to look into a mirror and see that in our inability to respond to this crisis of faith, to this crisis of identity as a nation, we allowed the Christ in these 2 children to die scared in a jail that we created to ease our own irrational fears of people who are not like us. 2018 has been a year filled with horrors and disappointments for many. A year that has shaken the very fabric of what it means to be an American. A year that has seen the rise of anti-Semitic speech and actions, where one side is shocked and appalled by the actions of so much hatred, and the other side, who supports such language and hate, defends those hateful actions or simply should stay quiet. A year where our social media channels have become filled with hateful speech from people screaming at one another through the stroke of the keys, with no intent on coming to the center and speaking honestly to one another. A year where our leaders continue to fail us in their inability or their unwillingness to bring peace to the chaos in our world and in our communities. A year where the church as a whole is so afraid of not being politically correct that it hides behind a thin veil of indifference when it comes to the soul of not just those in its pews, but of the nation itself. A year where we have failed our fellow neighbors, the refugees who seek a better life within our borders, our children in our schools to gun violence, on our moral standing in the world itself. But it is not too late to change the course and begin to live our lives clothed in love. Much like Secretary McCord and Madam Secretary, we must not allow the evils of this world, the fallen nature of the human heart, to silence us in the face of injustices. We must take the risk to do what is right, to do what is moral, and to speak up. Martin Luther King Jr. said that he who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as he who helps perpetrate it. So today, I am challenging all of us to walk into 2019, not just with a renewed sense of self, but with a zeal to do what we know in our hearts is right. Believing and trusting that it does not matter if our broken system of our world turn against us. It does not matter if those who we call friends turn against us. It doesn't even matter if we are hated by those whose grasp of power is based on oppression and lies. For we are empowered by the Spirit of the very nature of the universe, and we are to embody the one who the world hated so much that they hanged him on a tree and left him to die. So as we close 2018 and leave it behind us, we must ask each other this question: who do we want to be in 2019? Do we want to be active participants in the healing of our nation, our communities, our churches with love and compassion? Or do we fall back into the self-destructive loops of the evils of the human heart? We have a choice. So I am asking all of us here today, who do you want to be? Who do you want to be? Amen.